Oh, I'm beginning to have an accent after spending the weekend with Mary Pearl and JD. I love them, and I met them in 1985, and when Mary Pearl first came and spoke in Honolulu, and then I've gotten together with them numerous times since, and it's been a joy to spend time with her, and she's helped me so much. Her story really helped me to mend a lot of relationships in my life, especially with my mom. And so it's just a real privilege for me to introduce to you Mary Pearl from North Little Rock, Arkansas.
Aloha. Oh, now you sound like tourists now. Mahalo nui loa. Yeah, I forgot the door. Okay. I'd like to thank the committee for having allowed me the privilege to come here to Maui to speak at the conference. I would like to thank very much my dear friend Carol. She has been a joy in my life for a long, long time. I would like to thank my new friend Ethel. She did an awful lot of work on this deal, and I think she deserves a very big hand. And I'd like to thank all y'all that are here to be subjected to the suffering Al-Anon. Years ago, I was at a meeting, and when I went in, they asked me if I would speak. I was in an AA meeting, and they said, "Would you speak for us tonight?" And I said, "Well, don't y'all have a speaker? That's why we came, to hear the speaker." And they said, "Well, he didn't show up." And I heard two ladies say, "Oh my God, I hear we're going to have to listen to a suffering Al-Anon." And I thought, well, you can leave now. I don't want you to hear me suffer, you know. I suffered enough before I got here. I try not to suffer today. Like I say, I am a member of the Rose City Big Book Black Belt Al-Anon family group. They call us the hardcore group at home. What that means basically is we are Big Book, and we also use the 12 and 12 and AA in addition to the Al-Anon literature, but we have a group motto, and our motto is Rose City, where love and laughter come together in recovery. You know, and that's the thing, because, you know, when I first came to the program, I wanted to be an alcoholic so badly. Because there was not a lot of laughter in the rooms of Al-Anons. You know, they were those little thin-lipped, blue-haired, cookie-baking bitches. And that wasn't me. Still don't like baking cookies. It's boring. Did you ever think about it, doing the same thing over and over and over again? God, that's boring, you know. That's the reason you have pigeons that you sponsor. They can bake the cookies, you know. I mean, it's not happening here. I love Hawaii. I have my sister and I used to travel here in the islands. We would come every 3 years. We would stay a month while we were over here, and we really, really loved Hawaii. And so I also bring you greetings from my sister Dorothy. She doesn't remember being here, and I will tell you that about as we go along. I'm supposed to share in a general way what I used to be like, what happened in my life and made my life different, and what my life is like today. And when I look at my life in those terms, there's no way to go from where I was to where I am today. There's no way that you could possibly think that you could go from where you were to where your life is good today. That doesn't mean that life doesn't have its challenges. But I have tools to deal with these challenges that I never had before I got here. I'm the youngest of 4 children. I'm the change of life baby. And between me and my sister, there's 16 years difference, and she's the closest one to me. There was 20 between me and my older brother. And my other brother, who had been 25, had he lived. And so I was an only child. I was raised by old people. Mother was 41, Daddy was 54 when I was born. They were the ages of everybody else's grandparents, it seemed. And so I was never around other kids very much, other than in my neighborhood. And in my neighborhood, there were 11 boys and 1 other girl. So I loved that because I was a tomboy. I was a daddy's girl. I loved my daddy. My daddy was a retired military officer. And he wanted to retire to fish and hunt and raise bird dogs, and that's what we did. And then there was the warden who lived in our house. And my mother, she was dedicated not to have fun. My mother was the product of alcoholism. I know today that my mother was the untreated Al-Anon adult child. If there's such a thing. That's sort of like military intelligence. It's sort of an oxymoron. You know, it's childish adult. I mean, that's, I'm sorry. You gotta grow up. Sooner or later, you gotta get over, you know, you're not gonna have a better childhood. I'm sorry. It's just you can't go back and do that deal over again. You gotta go forward. But I was a product of that kind of a childhood. My mother's had a work ethic, and if you're not working, you're not worth anything. And so my daddy retired, my mother did not. And she was a dressmaker and designer, and people came from all over the United States to have my mother make stuff. My mother was a very talented lady. She could look at a picture, you could draw it, she'd take your measurements, and she could make it. She made a lot of stuff for the Ringling Brothers circus people and things. I mean, she was just very, very talented. I never gave her credit for that when I was growing up. When Mother would make my clothes, I would think of them as being homemade. And they were less than. So that's a child's mind. But anyway, my daddy and I, we'd go hunting and fishing, and we loved being together. And this one particular day that I'm going to share with you, it was the day that she decided she would ruin the trip, so she came with us. And, 'cause Mother can't have fun, you know. We were going fishing, and so Mother went with us fishing, and Mother had rules. Mother had rules about everything. She caught the first fish, the biggest fish, and the most fish. Other than that, you can fish. And so I did a no-no. I caught the first fish. It was just a little fish about so long. And my mother looked at it and said, "It's not a keeper." She ripped it off my hook and threw it back in. Well, I went into a screaming coma right there in the boat. I mean, I'm 5 years old. My mother's thrown my fish away. My God, that hurt my feelings. You know, it's my fish. It's not her fish. And Daddy said, "Honey, come back here in the back end of the boat with me." And as I got close to him, he said, "And we'll get her." I didn't know what it meant, but intuitively I knew I was going to like it. And what it meant was every time Mama would catch a fish, she'd swing around, and Daddy would take the fish off her hook, rebait her hook, and she would fish some more, and Daddy would hand me the fish, and I would throw it over. Every fish the old heifer caught that day, I threw back, you know. It was wonderful, and I was writing this in my inventory, and I realized when I was writing it, this is revenge. My best memory, you know, is revenge. God, I love slow premeditated revenge. You know, Daddy was playing a joke on Mother, but I didn't know that. I'm a little kid, and all I know is that she did something that hurt me, and now I'm doing it right back as many times as I can. And I was going to live like that my whole life afterward until I got to you. And even sometime after. It's funny, you know, you walk in the door, you don't get good here. But anyway, so that was one, I wrote that in my inventory as one of my most pleasant childhood memories. You can see Mama and I are not going to get along too well. Well, when I was 12 years old, on November the 30th of 1954, I watched my daddy die at home of a heart attack. And my world, as I knew, ended right there. Because I was left with her. And not only that, I knew that everything that I had been taught to that point about God loving me and God loving you and all like that was a lie. Because if God loved me, He would have taken her and not my daddy who loved me. Because I knew my mother didn't love me. My mother never told me she loved me. She never ever found anything good about anything I did. She always found the one thing that I didn't do, and she pounced on that. This is my perception. And so I couldn't stand my mother. So it was sort of like Daddy died and Mama and I declared war, and whoever dies first, the other one wins. This was the kind of relationship my mother and I had. If my mother told me to do it, I didn't want to do it on general principle. If she told me not to do it, I had to do it. I had to do it. It was like, I will get your attention one way or another. My mother did not know how to deal with her anger, so she was very physically violent and abusive. And knowing that she would hurt me, I would do things because, you know, when they're beating the hell out of you, you have their undivided attention. You know, that's so sick when I think about it. But I would do those things, and I would push her, knowing that she could not deal with that anger. And I would do that. So I don't blame her for that. You know, I instigated that. That's just like my mother, who didn't love me. She gave me 18 years of music lessons with professionals because she wanted me to be a concert pianist. I would have had no problem with that had she not wanted it so much. But, you know, I'm rebelling. I'm not going to do anything my mother wants me to do. And so for years I would play, and I would tell you I played for two reasons. I played for my amusement and your amazement. You know. And I never realized the amount of love and sacrifice that went into those years of those music lessons that I took. In the late 50s, they built an Air Force base in Little Rock. And they had an article in the paper, and they said there was 10 men for every woman in the local area. And I thought, hot damn, I want my 10. And I want your 10 and your 10 because there's never too much of a good thing. Never, never. Feels good, do it till you die on the spot. That's the way I live. That's my philosophy of life. Now you're saying to yourself, how come you're not an Alcoholics Anonymous, you know? I'm just a 6-pack short, they tell me. Because alcohol never did for me what it did for other people. And besides that, my mother had told me early on, and I had watched her family. You see, my mother came from a family where her father died of wet brain from alcoholism. Her mother died of cirrhosis of the liver from alcoholism. Her oldest brother was shot in bed with another man's wife. He was drunk at the time, but he was my favorite. He liked the excitement too. And then she had 2 sisters that died of alcoholism. So, you know, my mother was the only one in her family that didn't drink. I think she needed one. She was so uptight and neurotic. But did you ever think about this? If you're an alcoholic, when you drink, you get some kind of relief because you love the effect produced by the alcohol. What does the Al-Anon have? We don't have that. We just get very neurotic. We get very, very sick. Because we don't get relief. We don't get that relief that you have. And so I can look at that and I can see my mother. You know, my mother was a product of living like that. Okay, time goes on and they've got that base out there. And so I went trolling. And, you know, and I found this little old Yankee boy and he never knew what hit him. You know. He was from Pennsylvania, and I should have known right off it wasn't going to work because he didn't like cornbread, turnip greens, or grits. You know, there's just certain cultural differences you're not going to overcome, you know. But he told me he would take me away from home, and I wanted to be away from home more than I ever wanted to be anything else. And back then, they used to have these big billboards that says, join the Air Force and see the world. And there would be pictures of Japan and China, and there would be pictures of France and Spain and Germany, and we went to Newfoundland. It's an island also. Nothing like yours. We had snow 9 months of the year in Newfoundland. And the biggest excitement was, oh, there's a moose in the backyard. You know, sort of a boring place to be. But where did I find my excitement? Because you see, I'm addicted to adrenaline. I love the excitement. I'm an adrenaline junkie. And so I found that when I was in the clubs. And I love going to the clubs because, you see, you would hear the sounds of music to my ears, and that was laughter. And what did I associate that laughter with? I associate it with that ice going in that glass and that liquid going over that ice and going as that ice cracked, you know. And I enjoyed that. And to me, that was having good times. That was having fun. My husband played the lead guitar in the band. And so while he would play, I would work the room. I just loved it. It was great fun. I got a little carried away. See, I've never known what enough is. Have you ever noticed that you always know when you overshot the runway? You get it from looking back. Because the end's always back there. I always know the end after I've gone past it. It never occurs to me that it's coming up, you know. I see signs say end of runway coming up, end of runway coming out. You know, oh, that was the end of the runway. I got it now, you know. And that was the way I lived my life. I lived on the edge. And I did a lot of things that wrecked my marriage while I was there. And I worked for the American Red Cross. Now, when you work for the American Red Cross on an overseas base, you don't get an emergency leave off of the base without Red Cross verification back then. I don't know if it's still that way or not. But it was a really nice job to have. It had a little bit of power to it. And I enjoyed that. I had a black market down on the flight line. Like I say, I like to live on the edge. I would send when one of the KC-97s would go back to, say, down to Little Rock Air Force Base, I would get the captain of the plane, and I would talk to him, and he'd bring back me a whole bay full of watermelons, and I was bootlegging watermelons for $10 a piece back in 1961 on the flight line. You weren't supposed to be doing that, but see, that doesn't make any difference. Because I always like doing stuff you were told not to do. There's something very exciting about that kind of deal for me. And I was told I couldn't take booze off of the base. You're not supposed to transport booze because it's not taxed or labeled and stamped, so you're not supposed to take it off of the base. And I would have my car full, and they'd get stopped for an inspection at the front gate. And the guy would say, we need to inspect for liquor. And I said, that's okay. And I'd take my 2 big grocery sacks of liquor, and I'd step out of the car. And then he'd look in the car, and I'd say, thank you. And I'd step my loose back on my front seat and drive on through. See, if you act like you know what you're doing, you can get away with a lot of crap. Those are things, because see, I would just always, brave it out, go on and do what you got to do. Well, it came time for us to leave and come back. We were there for 5 years. And it came time to go back, and so I called down to SAC assignment section, and I said, where are we going? And he said, well, you're supposed to go to Minot, North Dakota. I said, Minot? I'm not. I said, that's cold ice and snow. I've been here 5 years in ice and snow. I'm not going back there. He said, where do you want to go? Well, I want to go back to Little Rock Air Force Base. Don't you know everything's going to be different back there now? Because, see, I didn't know that everywhere I went, there I was. That never occurred to me. I just thought it'd all be better. And he says, but there's not an opening in your husband's career field. I said, well, make one. I've always been a positive thinker. And he said, I can't. I said, well, then change his career field. He said, I can do that. And so with a stroke of a pen overnight, my husband, who was an aircraft mechanic, overnight became the head of a missile inspection team. And he had never seen a missile. But I got what I wanted. And when I think about that, it's sort of funny because he was never in on the conversation about where we're going. I never bothered to mention to him, it's because that's what I wanted. Because, it's all about me, for God's sake. And so it just never occurred to me to even consult him where he would like to go. He would go where I went. That was it. And so, you know how you're always going to try it one more time? It hadn't worked, but you're going to try it one more time. So we're going to try our marriage one more time. It had disintegrated a lot in that trolling. And guess what? It still doesn't work. It just doesn't work, And so what I convinced him was, I've been out of the country, and the hippie movement has been going on. This is 1965. I've missed a lot of the hippie movement. And I need to find myself. Now, true enough, I was lost. But what I wanted to be free to do what I wanted to do when I wanted to do it. And so what I convinced him with some fast talking for slow thinking was that he needed to go on to the next base and leave me there, and I could be okay. And that at some point I would join him. And knowing full well I was never going to join him again. And people say, well, how could you do that? And I said, well, it's real easy. It's called using people. I wanted the allotment check. I didn't want to have to work. I wasn't ready to be self-supporting through my own voluntary contributions. And so I lived off of that allotment check, and I lived well. And everything was going along. But then, see, I got bored. And now here's where I noticed the next alcoholic. Now, I knew what alcoholics were. I'd been around my mother's family and everything. And looking back on it, I knew a lot of them when we were in Newfoundland. But I wasn't into diagnosis at that point. And so later, I noticed this boy across the street. And his wife was pregnant. She was French Canadian, couldn't speak very much English at all. And so I became Joanne's friend. And so Joanne and I would talk and everything. And one night he came in. When he would drink, he would beat her up. And that's just the way my mother's family did. When they'd get drunk, they would be violent, and they'd have these big fights and shoot at one another and stuff. It was really exciting. I loved that. Anyway, she came over to my house one night, and she said that Jerry had come in and he had beaten her up, and her nose was bleeding and her lip was busted, and she said, I think I've gone into labor. She said, would you take me to the hospital? And I said, sure. And so I went over and I was helping her pack. And you know how a drunk will pass out on the bed with a sort of a smirk on his face? Well, there he was laying, you know, and I got to looking at him and I'm looking at her. And here's where I had my first spiritual awakening. Somebody ought to whip his butt. Look at her. I'm somebody. So I tied him up in the bed sheet. I took a slat out of the bed and I beat the fool out of him. And it just made me feel good all over. Took her on to the hospital. Next morning he came over to my house. He said, you know, I was in a hell of a fight last night. I bet you were. You know. And so then I noticed there was one on the other side of me. Now, I'm a night person by nature. My inner clock is really tuned to being a night person. And I would be up and I'd get home around 7 o'clock in the morning. I'd been having fun all night. And the next door neighbor, the doctor had told him he was an alcoholic. If he didn't quit drinking, he was going to die. Well, Freeman quit drinking. Died anyway. But he never found Alcoholics Anonymous. But he was irritable, restless, and discontent. I can identify that today. And so, but he had this unreasonable need to get out every morning about 8 o'clock and till his garden. Well, it's hot in Arkansas. You do stuff in the early hours in the morning before the day. But I'm not into caring about what he's doing in his garden. I'm trying to sleep. And so I went out and I told him about that. And he told me to shut my mouth and get my fat ass back in the house. Well, see, he didn't know about Mama and the fish. So I waited till 11 o'clock at night. I got my daddy's frog gig and headlight, and I mowed the grass. Well, this woke him up, you see. And, you know, he couldn't see the equity in that, and neither could the sheriff. And so I went into Plan B. You know, every good pre-Al-Anon has contingency plans. And now, he had 6 little beagles. Now, if you've ever had one beagle dog, you know you got a barking little dog. Well, he's got a whole chorus out there in the back. So I wait till the wee hours of the morning. I run off my back porch. I take a broom handle, run up and down that dog yard fence as hard as I can, get them dogs stirred into a complete frenzy. Then I jump back on my porch, and he comes out in his underwear, and he's screaming at them, cussing at them, hosing them down, trying to get them to shut up, and he goes back in the house. I wait an hour, and we do it one more time. And the sheriff came to see me. And there were several more plans, and the bottom line, though, was the sheriff and I were beginning to develop a relationship. So I decided I might ought to move on from this, and that's when I noticed we had a neighborhood softball team. I loved it. It was a mixed team, all ages, just go out there and have a good time. One neighborhood played the other neighborhood, and it was just great. After the games, we would all go back over to somebody's house. And over there, some of them would pop a few tops. Some of them were sniffing some stuff. And there were some that were on these little sugar cubes, you know, and just your normal neighborhood. And we were having fun, don't you know? We were having fun. And one night it was my turn to have everybody over to my house and after the game. And then all of a sudden I noticed that one of our members of the team had gotten extremely drunk at my house. He was 18. That's not legal age to drink in Arkansas. And I thought, if he gets picked up driving home, then the sheriff is going to get him, and then he's going to get me for serving him alcohol. And so I decided I would drive him home in his vehicle and have somebody follow me, bring me back. And on the seat of his pickup, there was a China tea set. And I said, what in the world is this? And he says, I got it for my mom for Mother's Day. I thought, isn't that sweet? But now he can't carry that, because if he's drunk as he is staggering, he's liable to drop it and break it. So now here's the picture. It's 2, 3 o'clock in the morning. I'm going into a strange house of people I have never been in their home before. I'm escorting their drunken 18-year-old son, and I'm carrying a China tea set. Your everyday situation. And when he flipped the light on in his bedroom, there's a man laying on the bed with nothing but his jockey shorts on. And he looks up and goes, well, hot damn, little brother, you brought us a broad home. And I said, well, not tonight, fella. That's J.D. We meet in the strangest of places, don't we? And later on that summer, J.D. and I started dating, and we were having a wonderful, wonderful relationship. Now, I recognized right off he didn't know how to drink well. because I was an everyday drinker, but he didn't seem to do well. Now, I didn't really like him when he wasn't drinking. He was sort of dull and boring. But if you get him 2 or 3 drinks now we're having fun, we're having party. But I didn't have him very long, because then it was 4, 5, and 6 drinks. And then he'd begin to think about every bad thing that ever happened to him in his life. And then in a little bit longer, then he'd get a mouth on him like an old chivy. You couldn't shut it. And so then I'd have to put him out of my misery. And, I didn't enjoy it when he drank, and I tried to explain to him how to drink. I tried to teach him how to drink right, and he just couldn't seem to get the hang of it. So he decided that maybe he shouldn't drink, and I thought that's good. And so we rocked along there for a while, and I didn't know anything about controlled drinking, that kind of thing. It's real funny how you've been born, raised all around alcoholism, and you don't know the first thing about alcoholism. Absolutely none. And so then J.D., after about 4 years, he said, I love you. I think we ought to get married. Oop! Well, there's a time to tell things. And if you go past the good time to tell things, then it doesn't seem to be a good time to tell things, And so I said, well, I can't. And he said, what do you mean you can't? And I said, well, I can't marry you. He said, don't you love me? I said, it has nothing to do with it. He said, well, what do you mean? I said, well, I'm already married. He said, what? And I said, I'm married. And he said, we've been going together 4 years, and I didn't know you were married. You sure didn't act married. I said, I forgot. I was having such a good time, I completely forgot. You know how it is, we have that purposeful forgetting, I think it mentions in the book. We see what we want to see, we hear what we want to hear, and that we don't. And so that was where I was at. And so anyway, I got a divorce on a Monday, and J.D. and I got married that Friday night. And guess what? Alcoholism moved into my home. Had not a clue J.D. was an alcoholic. Now, we got married on the 7th of November. We had a big party for Thanksgiving. I went into my fully stocked bar of November the 7th, and there wasn't anything in there. And I said, J.D., we've been robbed. He said, let me see. He even helped me look for it. Now, J.D. and me, a poodle and a German shepherd lived in that house. If I didn't drink it and the dogs didn't drink it, where in the world would it have gone? But you see, already my mind does not want to believe what is very obvious to a normal, sane human being. There's been no breaking and entering. There's been nothing like that. So obviously the only person left to have been drinking would have had to have been J.D. But I don't want to process it to that point. You see, the thing in my life is denial has saved my life and my sanity many, many times. Because I'm the kind of person that if I do not have a solution to a problem, I don't have a problem. I can't live with an unsolved problem. And so therefore, I could not have a problem. And so I blew that off. And then later on, I found out, alcoholism is an allergy. J.D. broke out in spots. Memphis, Dallas, New Orleans. He would go and be gone for days, sometimes weeks, and then come back and act like he had been gone 15 minutes. And during that time he had been gone, I had gone crazy. I had called everyone we knew. I had called all the jails. I had called all the hospitals. I called all of his family. I would not tell my family. That kind of thing. And then after he would come in and he would be so sorry and and then he would act like he had only been gone 15 minutes. And after about an hour, I was convinced he'd been gone 15 minutes and it was okay. And here we'd go right on. And that was the madness of the alcoholism. And then there were the times when we would play hide and seek. He'd hide and I'd go seek him. An Al-Anon is like, say, my daddy raised bird dogs. We're like a bird dog on the point. I'm here to tell you, we can find them. You get your nose to the ground, you can go and you can find them. And I would find him in places I wouldn't be caught dead in, but I would go in there to save my marriage. And I'd walk in, and there he'd be with a lore companion, and I'd find it necessary to slap her flat, flip the table upside down, and pulverize him. And guess what? The bouncer would throw me out. And I'm sober. I'm just trying to save my home, for God's sake. And every once in a while, I get really irritated with the bouncer and go around or two with him, and then I'd go to jail. It was not. Now, J.D. has never been barred from a bar, but I've been barred from several bars and pawn shops. J.D., thought he was real cute. We had a sign out front that said, she's dangerous when pissed. And that's true. And that's true. Because you know that thing about living in the violence and in the physical abuse, you can easily become the abuser. You get so used to that. That's how you deal with the anger, is you reach out and you hurt others too. And so anyway, like I say, this went on, and then finally, JD's getting where he can't hardly work, so I take on 2 jobs. I'm thinking that I'm taking up the slack. I don't realize how I'm enabling him all this time. And we would do this deal, he would come home and he'd open the door and my mouth was attached to it and I would tell him what he was and he would agree, and then we'd get into a fight and I'd beat him up, and then he was okay. Because he had done things that he knew he shouldn't have done, and when he came home and took his whipping, it was okay. And he was done, and then I was left with the guilt. Because let me tell you, you cannot hurt another one of God's kids without it doing something to you. You just can't do that. And so I would have all this guilt, and I saw a special one time on a husband beating and abuse in America, and I felt so tremendously guilty, but not enough to keep me from doing it again, mind you. But I didn't have any other way to deal with the anger. I didn't know what to do. And so then finally it got to a point where I told JD, I said, I've thrown you out many times, but this time I'm telling you, you're going to have to leave. I can't live like this. And he said, I don't mean to do what I do. He said, I think I'm sick. I said, well, that's the truth. You are sick, sick, sick. We're really quick with the sarcasm, and in Al-Anon I learned that means to tear flesh. It comes from a Greek word meaning to tear flesh. And I had ripped not only his flesh, but I had broken his spirit. Because when he thought of himself in very low terms, because I was there constantly reinforcing what a piece of crap he was to him. And so I'm not really proud of that. But that is what happened in the disease and alcoholism in our home. And I said, well, if you're sick, I'm going to take you to the doctor. So I took him to my family doctor. Now, for the first time, the doctor knows what's going on with me. Because, see, I'd been in there with stomach problems. I'd been in there with nerves. I'd been in there with high blood pressure. I'd been in there with all of these other things. And never once. And he would say, are you under any kind of bad stress? No! Everything's fine. Just fine. And now he realizes, and he says, well, JD, he said, I don't know what to tell you about a drinking problem. He said, medical people just we don't have a lot of answers there, but there's a group of people called Alcoholics Anonymous, and they seem to know. And JD says, I'm not an alcoholic. And I said, that's right, he's not. Because you see, I'm thinking like my grandmother's people, my mother's folks, and JD didn't drink like they did. And, it was just, it didn't look the same, so therefore it wasn't. And JD told him, he said, I got some friends that are taking a drug called Anabuse, and if I had just a little of that, I know I could be all right. Just a little help. So the doctor wrote him out a prescription for Anabuse, and I took it. I took the Anabuse prescription because he can't be trusted. And so I got it filled, and I became the keeper of the pills. Now, like I say, by this time, I've got high blood pressure, I've got a dog who's epileptic, and JD's on the pill. Every morning in a hurry going to work, I can't guarantee who got what, but everybody got a pill. Now, we're going off to see. Now, what have I said for all these years? If he'll quit drinking, I'll be okay. That's like saying, I got a headache, you take my aspirin, I'm going to be okay. And instead, guess what? It was worse. It was worse because he didn't have any treatment for alcoholism, and I had no treatment for alcoholism, the family illness, and we had no relief anywhere, no relief. And we couldn't even agree on anything, like take a big deal like supper. What do you want for supper? I don't know. Anything. You want some fried chicken? No, I don't want fried chicken. Well, what do you want? I don't know. Anything. Well, you want spaghetti? No, I don't want spaghetti. You make the world's worst spaghetti. Well, thank you for sharing. And so I would fix anything. And then he'd look at it and he'd say, you don't expect me to eat that, do you? I said, well, you have a choice. You can eat it or you can wear it. Sometimes he ate it. Sometimes he wore it. It was not a good time in our house. We fought constantly every day of the world. And it was that summer that I really began to go off the edge. Now, I know you think I've been there, but no, because this is when I really got sick. I got really, really emotionally sick. And I'm sitting there and I'm thinking, and that's the worst thing in the world, you're thinking. Because when you don't have anybody to bounce thinking off of, you will co-sign anything in your own head. You will co-sign anything. And it went sort of like this. Oh, God, I am so miserable. Isn't that the truth? Well, what do you want to do? I don't know. I just can't live like this any longer. Well, why don't we get a divorce? Well, we can't get a divorce. Why can't we get a divorce? Well, you can't get a divorce because you've already had to divorce one. If you have to keep divorcing them, there might be something wrong with you. We're not going there. But you know what you could do? What? You could be a widow. What? I like that. What was that? Widow. Yeah, if he were to die, you could be a widow. He would, oh, I like that, but he's not dying. We can take care of that. Well, what do you want to do? Well, I want to take an ice pick, stab him in the neck, and watch him drip. Oh, isn't that wonderful? Or we could back over him with the car, make a note, buy new tires. And I felt better. It gave me light at the end of the tunnel. And so then a few months later, I noticed where a lady had killed her husband, and the jury sent her to prison. And I went, how could that happen? Wouldn't have happened if I'd have been on a jury. That was tacky. No. So now we got to have another meeting of all the married pearls. And so that we're sitting there and we're all thinking again, and it's like all of a sudden it occurred to, if an alcoholic were to pass out in the bathtub and drown, who would know? Who would know? We all liked it. It was a group conscience. And so now that you got a solution, all you have to do is just wait till the time. And sure enough, a year to the week, J.D. went on abuse. J.D. got drunk. How could that happen? We had ice and snow on the ground. I heard the truck coming down the street. It was doing about 50 in second gear. And he came sideways across. He hit the hitching post horse that was cast iron and concrete, the end of the driveway. Pop, popped that off. He went sideways across the yard, hit a tree, and then bounced into the side of the house. And I looked and I said, he cannot drive on ice and snow. But then he opened that truck door and he poured out. I'd seen that too many times. And I'm looking out my front window and I said, I'll kill that SOB if it's the last thing I ever do. And so when he opened the door, I never said a word, just hit him as hard as I could. And when he fell, he hit the coffee table and it knocked him out. And I drug him across our living room floor, down the hall, into the bathroom, took his clothes off, ran the bathtub full of warm water, put him in, held him under. I held him under until the bubbles quit coming. And he's laying there in the bottom of the tub, and a voice comes. It's not a committee member. And this one says, look what you're doing. You can't do this. And I picked him up by the hair of the head, and I said, the hell I can't. And I put him back down again. And so he's down there in the tub again. And so the voice comes back and says, do you not realize you're committing murder? Premeditated murder. You're taking the life of someone you once loved. And it's a moment in time in which you see yourself as clearly as anything. I had become an animal to fight an illness. That moment, it told me how sick I was. And if you'd have told me prior to that moment that I was capable of premeditated murder, I would have told you you're crazy. But there I was. And so I snatched him up out of that bathtub, and thank God I had worked for the Red Cross because I knew how to resuscitate somebody. So I resuscitated him. I took him and drug him into the bedroom. And I got him up, dried him off, and got him up in the bed. I even got the hairdryer down and dried his hair because I didn't want him to catch cold. Crazy. Shut the door on that bedroom. I went in the living room and I began to rock. And I'm sitting there in that chair and I'm rocking back and forth for hours and hours. And the desperation, I can't even begin to tell you, because you see, I know I can't live like this any longer, but I don't know how not to live like this any longer. This is it. This is as good as it gets. I don't know what I'm going to do. And I heard him. And he would, every once in a while, he would make noises and scream, or he would yell for help or whatever, and I wouldn't go back in there. I didn't go back in that room for 3 days, and J.D. nearly died in that room. You see, he had alcoholic poisoning. He nearly hemorrhaged to death in that room. But I didn't know anything about alcoholism, so it's only by the grace of a merciful, loving God that I'm not in prison, and J.D. is alive today. I came home from work one day, and J.D.'s sitting there at our bar. He's not drinking. He's shaking really, really bad. And he said, I think I got to call that Alcoholics Anonymous thing, and I've been trying to call that number, and I'm hitting the wrong numbers. Would you please call that? So I called the central office of Alcoholics Anonymous there in Little Rock, and they told me there was a meeting in 1 hour's time, 6 blocks from our home, in a community building that was built by my grandfather who died of alcoholism. I went to scout meetings there in that community building when I was growing up. And so I took JD over to his first meeting, and I want to thank Alcoholics Anonymous, especially old-time AA, the kind that didn't sit around and say, well, now you just sit here long enough till you relate to somebody and get you a sponsor, because, see, JD would have died. There was an old man that came up to him that night, and he said, boy, I'm going to be your sponsor. JD might have been thrilled, but I was not impressed. He looked worse than Grandpa did when we buried him. And guess what? There's nothing worse than somebody getting better in your home and it's not you. Because that's what began to happen. JD was going with Durwood every day. They were going to 2 and 3 meetings a day. He was an old retired railroad man. He had the time, and he was taking JD and introducing him all over the county to all the different AA meetings, and setting up that lifeline for JD. And I didn't have that. And all Durwood would say to me is, if you don't stay off his ass, he ain't going to have a chance. And I'd think, go over and die, you old fool, you know. And then there was one night when he and Durwood did not come back from the meeting, and I thought, yep, they're both out drunk. That figures. But every time JD would go to these meetings, he would bring me back literature from the Al-Anons, and I wouldn't read that trash. But I threw it in the desk, and that night when he didn't appear, I somehow went over there, and in that desk I found that literature, and I began to read, and it was like somebody was looking in the windows of my soul. And there was a card in there, just a little plain business card, but it was plain white, and it said, my name's Earlene, if you ever want to talk. It's 11:30 at night, Earlene, I want to talk. So I called and woke Earlene up, and she was very, very kind. And so I told her that he and the old guy were out, probably drunk, and she said, well, probably not. Then she said something that scared me even more. She said, they're probably just talking, and I thought, about what? And we don't talk about what goes on in this house. Because, you see, I was ashamed about what went on in that house. And so anyway, she says, now we have Al-Anon. I said, well, I'm not that sick yet. Thank you very much. And so guess what? JD got fired from his job. Now, he worked maybe 1 or 2 days a week for 10 years, drunk all the time. But when he got sober, he couldn't work. He's a welder, and it's hard to work when you're shaking like this, you know. And so they fired him. And so JD went through the halfway house there at Serenity House. And then I had to do something about me. Because, you see, now I have all the responsibility. He has no job. Everything's on me now. And I'm there by myself. And so I went to that Al-Anon meeting, and I went in there and I said, ladies, I'm here for 2 purposes. A, how do you keep an alcoholic sober? And B, how do you manage when there's nothing left to manage? And there was a real smart aleck there. She said, C, we don't know. She said, we don't know how to do that. But, you know, the group that I went to, they'd started 4 months before. There were only 2 members of that Al-Anon group. And that night, God knew they were going to need help. And so he sent 2 seasoned veterans from another group over there to visit that night. And so those ladies explained and shared their experience, strength, and hope, which is the best thing we do. But the 2 words they said that meant more than anything to me were, we understand. For the first time, I was with people who understood what it was like to live in the disease of alcoholism. And it's also scary because when you start living in recovery and it's only one person, that is really, really hard. That is really, really hard. And JD was struggling, and I can see why, because I did nothing to encourage him. I did nothing to comfort him. I did nothing to make it better. You know, I know that as an Al-Anon, I can't cause someone else to drink, and I can't control their drinking, and I can't cure them of that drinking, but I can contribute to their misery. And that's what I was doing on a daily basis. I was contributing to his misery, making it that much harder for him as a newcomer to maintain his sobriety. But you know, by the grace of God, absolutely the grace of God, J.D. and I both celebrated this year 30 years of recovery. I was told to take my focus off of him and put it on myself, and boy, did I. You know, it's real funny. You know, you don't have a life. It's like, you know, if you're dying, you know, somebody else's life passes in front of your face if you're an Al-Anon. You know. You just don't know, because you got to make sure somebody else is okay in order for you to be okay. And that's the trying to find a solution outside that's going to take care of a hole on the inside. And a hole on the inside can only be filled from the inside. That is the only way. Do we have an organ donor here? Anyway, I began to go. I got a sponsor. Wasn't anybody I wanted to sponsor me, but I got her anyway because she's the only one that wasn't afraid of me. It was so funny, you see, because I was raised in Little Rock, Arkansas, and this year they're celebrating the 50th anniversary of the Little Rock Nine, or the integration segregation war that we had. And I was raised to be a racist. And so therefore, it was really ironic that the one person who was kind to me and who reached out to me at every meeting would be a black woman. It was amazing to me. And so I decided, I told JD, I said, I don't want no black woman sponsoring me, so I'm just going to ask her and I'm going to tell her how I feel about it, and then I can go on from there and put that behind me. So I went up to her and I said, I need to talk to you. I said, I think I want you to sponsor me, but I want you to know right off, I don't like, and I said the N-word. And she said, me neither. And I said, what? And she said, well, if you'd look it up, you'd see it doesn't have anything to do with color. It's an attitude. Oh, who knew? See, here it was. I had no idea. So God gave me exactly who I needed in my life, because she was the first mama I ever had that I loved. And she's still my sponsor this day. That has been the most constant thing in my life since I came in this program, has been my sponsor. And I'll be forever grateful, but because of her, I can love all people, regardless of race, color, creed, or whatever kind of sexual persuasion. All that kind of crap is just crap. She said, what we're in here? We're hearts that hurt. And a heart that hurts has no boundaries. So the only boundaries that you do are the ones you put on yourself, And so she set me free. She set me free with that. And so I began to do the things that she told me to do. I knew they wouldn't work and they were stupid. But the funny thing about it is when I did them, they worked. The thing about it is, she tells me my thinking is broken, so try not to use it so much. And I had to, it's a little humbling to have to listen to somebody who's less educated than you and all this kind of stuff, and to do what they tell you to do and for it to work when your life never worked. I became very grateful to that woman. And she's in a struggle today because her husband, even though y'all might know him, he used to go around the world with a big book study. His name was Joe. And Joe has Parkinson's disease, and it's very advanced right now. And so I'm sure they would appreciate all your prayers. Anyway, I began to do the things she told me to do. I took my focus off of JD, and then one day I realized, I was beginning to learn something different in regard to JD. I was beginning to get some respect for him. Some respect for him as a person, as a sober member of Alcoholics Anonymous, and seeing him change and the people that he was helping and that kind of thing. Those things begin to make everything different in our home. And when we started practicing traditions in our home, that made a tremendous difference in our own personal relationship with one another. And then I said, but what about Mama? That is the worst relationship of my life. My sponsor agreed. And so she said, she says, when you become ready and willing, God will put your teachers in your path. And I had been in the program 5 or 6 years, and I began to get afraid my mama might die because she was getting really old. And I said, I don't want her to die and to have this thing between me and her. And I had tried many times. I remember, don't be sure and work the step you're on. Don't try to jump around. Because I was in the program about maybe a month, and I went to a meeting on the 9th step, and I decided I would run from that meeting to my mother's. Now, I had been on step none, and I am going to go to my mother's, and I'm going to do step 9. And so I went in, and this was how it went. Mama, you thought I always hated you? Well, you were right. Funny, she didn't hear anything after that. That didn't work very well. My sponsor said, "Oh my God, why didn't you call me before you did that?" Well, see, I wasn't in the habit of calling my sponsor to ask her stuff, Today, that's sort of an automatic. You run it past God, yourself, and another human being, I mean, that's part of the process. So I try to run it past my sponsor, and if I can't get her, someone else's program that I admire. Because I know that my thinking, I'll co-sign anything in my own head. My ideas are brilliant. Yours are mediocre at best. See, that's the kind of thinking I have, And so anyway, she said, "You're going to have to make an amends for the amends. That is bad, bad." But not today, not today. And so I went on for a while like that, and then I became willing one night, and God sent a girl from Missouri into our group that had worked through a lot of mother stuff. And the first thing she told me is, she said, "You're going to have to accept your mother just as she is, not the way you want her to be. You're probably not what your mother wanted either." And that's true. There's no perfect parents. There's no perfect kids. We're just human beings out there trying. We're just children of God out there feebly trying around, trying to do the best we can with what we have where we are. And so she said, "Why don't you give your mom a break and quit asking her to be the kind of mom you want her to be, because obviously she can't be that." And so when I was at that meeting, I squalled all the way out of that meeting. I squalled all the way home. And going across the bridge from Little Rock into North Little Rock, I said, "God, please be my mama. You've been my daddy for a long time now. Please be my mama and give me what I need and let it be enough and help me to accept my mama like she is." And that was a very sincere prayer. And so when I would go around my mother, I didn't realize how much that I did that upset my mother, because I was trying to help her. I did things to help her. She didn't ask for help. When you're doing things for people, you might ought to find out if that's what they want. Help unasked for is rarely appreciated. I got a newsflash, And so I had my mother's house air conditioned for her. And my mother said, "I'm 80 years old. I'm freezing to death. I can't see out my windows. I hate the damn air conditioning. Take it out." Okay. And then I realized later that I wanted the air conditioning because I was uncomfortable when I was at my mother's home. You see, her blood was thin. She didn't need the air conditioning. I was the one that was miserable. See, that self-sacrificing person here? It had to do about me too. It wasn't totally about my mother. And I kept trying to do things to bring her into the new world, like get her a microwave. I'm not eating food out of a microwave. Why, Mama? Because it has all those little waves and stuff. And I'm still not sure about Sputnik, so we're not going there, Okay, All of those kind of things I kept thinking. But you see, it was easier for me when I was at Mama's to warm stuff up if I'd have had a microwave. See, that it still came back to the self-centeredness on my part. And so then finally, I was told, "Why don't you try acting like a kind and loving daughter?" I don't know how. Like, Mother's Day. Is that not the worst day of the year? Mother's Day? You've got to get them a card. I want one that says, "Happy Mother's Day, bitch." I got her one time with a shoebox Maxine. I love Maxine. I think I am Maxine. Anyway, she said, "The longer you bitch, the longer God lets you live." I gave that to my mother. She's in her 80s. She did not think it was funny. Okie dokie. So I said, "But you mean I've got to get one of those, 'You've been a good mother' kind of blah cards?" And my sponsor said, "If that's what she wants, if you're going to be a good, kind, loving daughter, you'll give her what she wants." And I said, "I don't know if I can do that." And so I got it, and it was all I could do to put my name on it. My sponsor mailed the first one for me. I just couldn't bring myself to it. And then by the next year I could, and I began to go over there and I began to try to do things now, like listen to my mother instead of, putting the phone down when she would talk and ignore her. I began to listen to what my mother would say. I gave her the gift of my listening. I began to try to do things that she wanted to do and things that she liked to do. Even if I hated it, I would try to do it and do it cheerfully in the idea of it was service. Because, see, I've been taught in here about service. And I learned during this period of time that life is just a potluck. What are you bringing? It's not all about you and what you get out of stuff, but what are you bringing? What good are you out here? And I kept praying, God, let me see my mother through your eyes, because that was the other tool the girl gave me, is let God show you what that person looks like through his eyes. And I prayed that prayer for over 5 years, and I told my sponsor, when can I quit praying the prayer? When it works. Oh, thank you. All right. And so you keep on. And then one fall day, I was going to my mother's, and as I pulled in the driveway, she was out in the back field raking leaves. And I realized something about my mama. She was very short. Now, why wouldn't you know your mother's short? Is that not berserk? You know? And I'm sitting there in the seat and I'm going, God, why would I not have known Mama comes up to here? And it's because you always come as a little child. You never come as an adult to another adult. You come as a child. And when you're a child, Mom and Daddy are big. And you always come wanting from your mama. All I ever wanted, God, was for my mama to just tell me one time she loved me. Just one time she approved of something. Just one time. Never got it. Then you keep going to a dry hole here, don't you? You know, and as I'm walking up to the back to see my mom that day, it's like God gave me the gift of seeing in her heart. And then it was like it was full of scars. You see, I always felt my mother withheld love to punish me because she thought I was bad. And I realized today that you can't transmit what you don't have. My mother never had anybody teach her about love. She wasn't lucky like me to have all of y'all. You know, I learned how to love in rooms of AA and Al-Anon, to love people in spite of the problem, and probably more so because they were so human. You know, in here, the worse you are, the better they love you, you know. It's amazing. It's amazing. And so I went up there, and when I got to her, you know, the book says treat her like a newcomer. And so I reached out and I said, Mama, put your leaf broom down. And when Mama did, I gave my mama my first hug. And boy, she was stiff as a poker. Because, you know, we don't touch, we don't talk, we don't hug, we don't do anything like that. But that was a turning point for me. Because, you see, I knew if anybody was going to have to bring love to that relationship, it was going to have to be me, because I was the one who had it. I was the lucky one. And so every time I would go back, and there's another thing we need to learn, and that is consistency. And every time I would go to see my mom, I would touch her, I would pat her, or I would give her a hug. There's great power in the human touch. And then over a period of time, one day I went over to my mom's and I was sitting there talking with her, and she says, I want to ask you something. And I said, what? She said, how come when your daddy died, you became such an ornery kid? And I said, well, I was getting even with you for not loving me. And she said, what do you mean I didn't love you? You see, my mother had been raised in that alcoholic home, and her father had physically, emotionally, sexually abused her for years. And one night he came in drunk and he was trying to rape her, and she took a stick of stove wood and hit him in the head and ran away from home. She was 13 years old. She walked hundreds of miles. She stole food out of people's gardens. She slept in culverts till she got to Memphis, Tennessee. She was living in an alleyway next to a boarding house. The lady who owned the boarding house was pregnant. She came out and told my mom, if you'll come up and help me, I'll give you room and board. And she took my mom out of that alleyway. My daddy was the head of the recruiting office for the Army. He took his meals in that boarding house. And that's where they met. And when she became 16, they got married in the parlor of that boarding house. Now, if you'd had to live like that, what would be the greatest gifts you could ever give a child? A roof over her head, clothes to wear, and food to eat. It was more than Mama ever had. And that's what she said. She said, what do you mean I didn't love you? I gave you that roof over your head, those clothes to wear, and the food to eat. And you know something? It became enough. It became enough. And I looked at my mama and I said, Mom, how can I make it up to you for all the things that I've done that have hurt you? So many of them on purpose. And my mama said, forgive me for not being the kind of mama you needed. And I said, Mama, I forgive you. And my mama got up. She walked across the bedroom. She put her arms around me and gave me the hug, gave me the kiss, and said, baby, I love you. I've always loved you. The first time I ever heard those words from my mama. And I wouldn't have had that if I hadn't have done what you told me to do. That lifetime of hurt became okay that day because I had been willing to walk the walk and do those things that y'all told me to do, which I didn't think would ever work. And my mama and I had several really good years. That didn't mean we didn't get on each other's nerves. It didn't mean we never had a crossword, but we never had that feeling, that wall between us like we had had all those years. And then my mother got a mental illness where they turn on the ones they love. So my sister became the good kid and I became the bad kid again. And I said, well, it's a role I'm used to. And it was very painful, though, because Mother, she was losing her mind. She had hardening of the arteries of her brain. And she became convinced that I was trying to kill her and that I was stealing from her. And at first I tried to joke it off to myself when she'd say, you stole my 3-quart mixing bowl. Now, why would you steal a 3-quart mixing bowl, And I talked to her physician, and he said, do you know, it's easier for her to believe you're stealing from her than it is for her to accept she's losing her mind. It's easier for her to do that. And but when she tried to kill me one afternoon, it went a little over the edge, and so I knew I couldn't be around her anymore. But then, about 2 weeks after that, Mama had a major stroke. And it put her where she couldn't talk anymore. She couldn't swallow. She could walk, but it paralyzed stuff in here. And all she could say was, wee wo, wee wo, wee wo, wee wo, that's all. But to her, when she would say it, she was thinking what she was trying to say. And so it was very, very frustrating from her. And she had to go on a feeding tube, and so we had to put my mother in a nursing home. And she knew that Dorothy had her power of attorney and that Dorothy was responsible. So overnight, Dorothy became the bad kid and I became the good kid. And I have lots of good memories from going down every morning after I would walk. I would go down and spend time with my mother. And when I would come to the nursing home, my mother would do like this to tell me she loved me. She would hug me. She was more affectionate to me the next several years than she had ever been in a lifetime. And those are very precious memories for me. And then in 1991, my mother passed away. And when she passed away, I was okay. Because everything was good with me and Mom. We were current. I had no regrets. I had done the deal. And I can't tell you how good that is. Dorothy and I were at the funeral home. And Mama by that time was 91 years old. And so all of her contemporaries had long passed. And so it was just a few, like my sister, and my mother had one sister still living. And the rest of the people were all the members of Alcoholics Anonymous and Al-Anon. It was a huge a bunch of people. Not that they knew my mom, but they were there for me and J.D. The love that we have in our fellowship for one another is it's much better than blood family. I call you my family by choice. You can't do anything about those you're born with, but you can choose the others. But, Dorothy and I are sitting there, and after everybody had gone, we're looking at Mama there, and she looked so pretty. I don't think I'd ever seen her look that good. She looked younger than she did when I was born, I believe. But anyway, I said, Dorothy, I said, the funeral director was a real ditzy woman. And she came in there and she said, a lot of people look at and does she look natural to you? No, I'm thinking, how your mind thinks one thing but you say another? I'm thinking, no, she looks dead. She does not look natural. And I said, she looks very nice, And then she says, a lot of times people will look to see if the chest is still moving. And I'm thinking, boy, that is dumb. If the chest is still moving, we're in bad trouble here because she was embalmed. But, oh, really? I'm just, hanging in there. And so after everybody left, Dorothy and I was talking about the ditzy woman. And I said, what the test would have been for Mama anyway? My Mama had one byword, and it was shit. And so I went over and I tapped her on the hands. I said, Mama, say shit. And I looked at Dorothy. I said, she's dead. And we got to laughing so hard, because course, Mama didn't say anything, you know. I mean, but it was so funny. We got it. The funeral director thought we were losing it and came rushing in there to comfort us, you know. And we were absolutely rolling in the floor. And she looked at us like, "How could you do that? That's your mother," you know. But that's what you gave me, the ability to laugh in those situations sometimes that you can see humor even in the direst of circumstances. But this was not a bad thing. My mother had been trapped in that body that had stroke after stroke after stroke. And she was now released from all that. And my mama could be happy, joyous, and free. On 30 years to the day that I watched my daddy die, on November the 30th of 1999, my sister, Dorothy, died in the front seat of my car with me. Dorothy had kidney failure, and when her kidneys shut down, it threw her heart in a bad rhythm, and it stopped. And we were in bumper-to-bumper traffic. And I'm going, okay, God, what do I need to do? Do I need to do CPR? I got to drive. What do I drive? Do I do CPR? God, I need it right now. And about that time, here came a motorcycle cop, and I explained to him that I needed help to get to a hospital. There was a new hospital just opened 2 weeks before, 7 blocks away. And I rushed Dorothy over there. She was blue by the time I got her there. And when they took her in, they said there probably wasn't going to be any hope. And I said, well, whatever. And so they took me off in this little room, and then they came back in a little while, and they told me that they had jump-started her heart, and they had done an emergency dialysis on her, and that she was in a coma, and they didn't know if she was going to live or not or whatever. And for the next 25 days, I lived at that hospital off and on. The time that I wasn't in the hospital across on the other side, because I couldn't, when Dorothy went down, I started shaking, and I couldn't quit shaking. I mean, 2 days later, I'm still shaking. I can't seem to get out of the shaking. And so the doctor told me I needed to get seen about, and they found out that I had a heart problem. And so anyway, J.D. told me, he says, this is horrible. Both my women are down. He said, you're in one hospital, she's in another. He said, I don't know what to do here. I don't know where to go first. And I said, well, go take care of Dorothy. Because, you know, when I went into that hospital, my whole home group was there for me. My whole home group were there. And they all stood around my bed, and they held hands, and they prayed for me. And those are things that, you know, just mean more to you than anything in the world. And so anyway, what happened was when Dorothy woke up, Dorothy had to learn how to walk and talk, and she had to learn how to be continent, and everything. She'd start all over again. And Dorothy's short-term memory is very, very short. It's 15 minutes long. She doesn't remember the last 35, 40 years of her life, the most current. She can remember stuff back when kids and stuff like that, but she doesn't remember being here in Hawaii. And so what I do for Dorothy is I go down there a couple of times a week to the nursing home. I kept her in her own home for 5 years, and we went through over $500,000. And I went back to work, and that was not, you know, the hard times come even though you're in the program. Don't think you're bulletproof, because the year 2000 was not the most stellar year of our lives. You know, I lost my health as I knew it. My sister was gone. I lost both of my dogs, which were my kids to me. They were 16 and a half. I lost one of the girls that I sponsored. We had the big ice storm. I lost all the trees in my yard. I had a big 75-gallon aquarium, and I watched all my fish die because we were without power or heat for 10 days. When you're really powerless, it gives a whole new word to the meaning, you know. And I went into a profound depression. I was just very depressed. And during all this time, I'm going to meetings more than I've ever gone to meetings before. And it's like I needed every one of those. And and I'm saying, but it's not working. It's not working. But you know something? Oh, you just keep doing what you know to do, and sooner or later it kicks in. You know, but it's a process. And I was in grief, and I couldn't get over one grief till the next grief and the next grief. And then JD's job, his company sold to another company, and they did away with our retirement. And so after 20 years of not working, I went back to work. That's where I am today. I'm a paralegal for an attorney there in Little Rock. And it wasn't how we had planned to spend our golden years, having to work every day. And it's just like when we go home, we'll leave here on Monday, and we'll get home Tuesday morning. And 3 o'clock Wednesday, he's going to be hauling out to go to work, and he's 71 years old. But you do what you got to do. You know, you live life on life's terms, and sometimes life's terms are not really what you had hoped they would be. But you do what you got to do, and we are blessed. It's not a really, oh my God situation. It was at first when you think about it. But it's survivable, and we live really well one day at a time. And I go down and visit my sister a couple of times a week. I take her out, get her hair done, and get her nails done. We have lunch together, and we make memories in the moment. My sister has taught me all about living in the moment because that's all she has. It's been a blessing in a lot of ways. And my sister, because she can't remember any of the bad things that ever happened to her in her life. She can't remember those things. So for that, I am truly grateful. Well, my life is but a weaving between my God and me. I do not choose the colors, but He worketh steadily. Oft-times in sorrow, sometimes foolish pride, I forget He sees the top while I the underside. Not till the looms are silent and the shuttle cease to fly will God unroll the canvas and explain the reasons why. But the dark threads are as needful in a skillful weaver's hand as the threads of gold and silver in the pattern God has planned. I thank you for having me.